You're listening to the 4-Phase Cycle podcast with your hosts, Dr. Alex and Megan of ZESTY Ginger. If you're looking to naturally balance hormones and learn how to work with your body instead of against it, you've definitely come to the right place. As a duo of an integrative MD and a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner and best friends, we use the 4 phases of the female cycle in combination with functional lab work and mindset practices to transform the lives of the women we work with.
We also have a whole lot of fun along the way. If you're new around here, it's best to start with season 1 before jumping around and plan to roll up your sleeves. Showing up for ourselves and enjoying our lives is what good health is all about. Just a quick reminder though, this information is not intended to diagnose, manage, or treat disease. Always consult with your doctor before making changes.
Hello, lovely souls. Alex here. I'm popping in for another solo podcast episode. And before we get started on this one, get ready because you're going to be hearing my voice a lot. I have decided to do another 28-day series for the podcast, and that's going to be coming out super duper soon. And you'll want to just remember that the podcast episodes are going to come out every single day during that time. So if you want to turn on the notifications for the podcast, then you can get reminded that that is happening. Otherwise, if you're someone like me who loves listening to podcasts as you do stuff, they're going to be kind of smaller, bite-sized. Although, if you've been here a while, I always say that and then I always blab forever. But they are intended to be short and they're going to come out every day. It's going to be talking you through the cycle. And essentially, at each point, like we've talked about, there are things that our body, our brain, our physiology, even our mindset is going to be primed for as females as we fluctuate through our cycles. And even if you don't have a period, there's still things happening underneath the surface. And so, with that, I'm going to essentially do 28 days in a row of talking you through that. And my goal there is to further your understanding, all of ours understanding of what does it actually look like day to day to kind of live out and consider what your body is doing, and at each point asking what is going to be the most supportive thing for me right now. The struggle that we see from a lot of people is that they're like, I read that this is good, I have to work out, or I have to eat this, or I can't eat this, and then it's like every single day it's just kind of a slog. And for some of us, there's some components of something that we do all the time or something we don't do all the time. Like for me, gluten is just a no, right? Celiac, I just don't eat it. However, for the most part, the more rigid that I am in my life with things, the more unhappy that I've ended up being, either in the long run or at different times, because we are just so dynamic that some days it's like I don't want to do the 3 mile run that I had planned, or the 17, I used to run marathons. I just don't feel like it, and that it becomes a question of, is this the time to push, or is this just the time where my body is asking for something else and it's okay for me to be responsive to that? And there's obviously lots of layers to it. Like some days it doesn't matter what the cycle's doing. Sometimes you just need a rest day, right? But when you consider that layer of what is the body doing at any given time, it gives us a whole lot more insight. And then we begin to layer it in with, what are my goals, what are my highest values, where am I going, right? And then with that, even though we can be responsible and committed, then that reactivity to what we actually need at any given moment, we can start to show up for ourselves with more awareness, with more kindness, with more understanding. And that is really something that is a goal for Megan and I to see in the world, right? Instead of telling women what to do and kind of passing down things like you should do this, as a society, it would be nice to see more compassion and allowance, and just really having more of that humanity experience of we change day to day, and this is what I'm doing today, and I can feel good about that. So that's really the goal of that 28-day series. So you'll be hearing me a whole lot, and we'll go through them. And today, though, I wanted to talk about beliefs. And we've been talking about this a lot, but for me, this has been kind of a personal journey that I've been on for a while, and you've heard me talk about this, but I think today I wanted to cover it in a slightly different way because I think that for me, I've recently been gifted with some challenging times that really made me question, you know, am I willing to believe uh, something that I can't yet see? And irrespective of what is being thrown at me currently or moving towards me currently, trusting that those things are the way that I'm getting to there. And I think that from that kind of experience that I had, I found a limiting belief, or the way Megan puts it, is a limiting decision, right? Um, somewhere along the way, we were living our lives, and then we decided that something was going to be true for us. And so sometimes people call that limiting beliefs because, I mean, it is belief and it is limiting, but it feels even more empowering to Megan and I when we've talked about this to call it a limiting decision, because a belief, a lot of times people are like, well, that's just what I believe and I don't want to let that go. Whereas a decision, we all kind of are on board with, can make a new decision at any given point. And so just because you identify one doesn't mean you're stuck with it. And the same is true about beliefs. I just think sometimes the words matter in terms of what that says to us and how we interpret those things to our brain. And so sometimes limiting decision seems to have a little bit less resistance to it than limiting beliefs. Either way, one of the things that I uncovered for me is that I actually had the limiting decision of, and this sounds silly and judgmental, but I'm being completely transparent here. My decision was, it's actually insane, which is why I titled this the way that I did. It's insane to really believe and act in a way where my health and my life is a certain way that has not actually yet happened. And it's interesting that there's so many layers to this, because I already did that with chronic pain, where it's like I experienced chronic pain and I had it, and then in the process of rewiring my brain and healing from that on all the different levels that requires, a component of it was literally I had to believe and imagine and act in the ways that I felt ready to act as if I didn't have pain. And then I was able to heal. And so that started to anchor it in. But I will say, even with that, I mean, you would think like I overcame something that I had for 17 years. You'd be like, oh, you're done. But turns out for me, and I think for a lot of people, there's a lot to that. Just because it happens in one area doesn't mean we don't have limiting decisions um, that have a similar root cause, like this is just insane, to other areas of our life. So for health, I was able to wrap my head around it, and then I'm still catching up in other areas of my life where I'm also seeing that play out, because for each area of our life there are some things that we can feel really empowered about, and there are some things that we have picked up over time, ideas that we really don't feel empowered by. And those things, because they carry so much doubt, can still be harder to wrap our heads around than something. So for you, that may be health. For someone else, that may be relationships, like finding one or having a good one. For someone else, it could be their relationship with their family or their career or what their dharma is in the world. All of these things are individualized, and even in each person, there seems to be variability and changes that happen in terms of our beliefs. And so I realized as I kind of hit that new level, I still had a decision that I had made of like, it's actually kind of crazy to do this. Why am I acting and programming in things as if they were true when I can look around in my reality and find evidence for them not being true? And boy, that's a doozy. Because, I mean, even day to day, like, there were times where I got to the point where I was like, you know what? This is like, I know this stuff is how it works, right? Like you can't keep hammering on the old story and get a new outcome. And yet, then I'd have a rough day or something would happen, or I don't know, full moon, it doesn't matter. And then down I'd go of like, but there's no evidence. It must be insane. And one of the things that kind of helped me start to break through was really thinking of what would it look like if this was external to me. Right? Because when we're inside our own heads, as the water gets choppy on certain days, it's a lot harder to keep looking at where you're going rather than where you are, right? When things are good, yeah, you can look down the road and say, of course, that's where I'm going. But when you're on choppy waters, you're looking straight down. You're like, I hope I don't fall. I hope that I don't get hurt. I'm scared of what is happening. You're not as inclined to look down the road then. So like, and that there is, our brains are kind of built for that kind of thing, right? It's a safety thing. And yet, if we want to overcome that, we still have to keep moving in that direction, even and especially so when the water gets choppy. But it can be hard. It really can be hard. And so, with that, as I imagine, like, what if this was someone external to me? And the concept came to mind of, like, what if I came up to someone that I love and said, you know, this thing that we have a dynamic about isn't working for me. It does XYZ. I'm asking us to move the way that we interact or our relationship in this new way, right? And so the person's like, yeah, I can do that. Let's work on it. Let's say they're they've been controlling in the past, and just to concretize this, they've been controlling in the past, and now you're asking them to allow you to have your space and freedom to do what you're going to do. And they get on board. They're like, cool, I'm going to do that. And then the next day you come downstairs and you're like, gosh, you're really controlling. And the person's sitting there like, well, I'm just still getting my breakfast. Like, I haven't even said anything to you yet. Like, the first couple days, they'd probably be like, well, I'm trying to, I'm like, I'm changing, right? Like, this is a process. If you did that for days and weeks and months, we all kind of can figure out that person's not going to change their behavior if we continually treat them in a way and talk to them in a way that reinforces their old behavior. Because, and I bet that you can think of times where that has happened, where it's like you're trying to change the dynamic of a relationship, but because that person is continually treating you like they always have, you kind of act like you always did, right? And then nothing changes. And when I was able to see that for what that looks like externally, I came to the realization that I often do that to myself internally. So I set, this is how I want to do things, this is how I want to approach things, this is where I'm going, even though I don't have the evidence. And then I keep turning back around going, oh, but this is the evidence for now. This is the evidence for now. This is the evidence for now, right? And I've talked enough on the podcast about how the brain works, is that the brain, other than like, trauma patterns and conditioning, for the most part, it doesn't have its own opinions on kind of where we're going. It is waiting for us to either consciously or inadvertently program what it is, right? So that's why when we focus on something, good or bad, the brain's like, look for more evidence for that. And that's why if we continually treat ourselves, for the pain, I actually had to stop treating myself as a pain person before I stopped experiencing pain, which, when you think about that, is kind of a trip and a half, right? It's very much leaping off the cliff and hoping that there's going to be something that unfolds underneath you. But what is reassuring is that the brain is kind of the net where, when you're setting your sights on something and you act and move in that direction and actually let go of the belief that it's just insane, and you just say, I I don't see it yet, but that's where I'm going. When you're flying to LA from New York, you don't see LA in the distance when you're in New York. It's too far away. You know that it's over there, and you get on a plane and you go over there, and as you get closer you see it. But no one is ever going to be like, well, I don't know that LA exists, right? And so it's the same thing here of, it's out there. If someone else is healthy, or if someone else has a beautiful relationship, or someone else has a great career that they love and feel fulfilled by, it's evidence that that is available to us, right? And so just because we in the moment can feel like, gosh, it's not here yet, where is it? Am I a little crazy for believing in this? It's reassuring to remind ourselves that if we continually train our eye to be on there, and our beliefs to continue to move in that direction, and again, won't be perfect. You're gonna have days where you're like on the bathroom floor, probably, maybe not, but let's face it, most of us will. And you're gonna have doubts, but turning that back around and saying, it's insane to stay the same. And that's kind of what my ultimate takeaway was even when I worked on that limiting decision with NLP, ultimately, even consciously, I was able to say, like, at the times where I feel bad, yes, it's hard, but when I really look at it, I'm like, the crazy part for me is not believing something I can't see. There's a lot of stuff I've created and moved towards that I couldn't see, I had no idea about. But what is actually insane, and that I will not make the decision about, is to continually reinforce that I'm stuck and that things won't change and this is how it is. Because that, to me, like, why do something so damaging when it's available to you? And that's like the hard work, I think. And I've said this 10 million times, but people think with health, it's like, if I just had the perfect food, if I had just had the perfect supplement, and believe me, we know that stuff is important. But again, if that stuff is easy, you get supplements, you put them in your mouth and you swallow them, like that, for the most part, is not going to really mess with people. What the hard work is like, what does it look like to exist and believe in something that is still coming, and be so committed to that vision that the ups and downs, while they may temporarily derail you, you still just kind of flow through them. And once I got that bigger picture and was able to see that I was treating myself in a way that I would never treat someone else, it got easier to weather that kind of stuff. So, my question for you as a wrap up to this is, do you have thoughts like this? How do you actually feel about goals? Like, how do you feel about dreams? Are you open to really believing that these things can happen even when you don't see the evidence for it? And my guess is that there's probably going to be layers to this. There's some things that you're not going to have any resistance about. There may be things you have a lot of resistance about. There may be things where you're like, yeah, I generally believe in it, but not when XYZ. And the reason that doing that kind of work is important is that when we have that foundation, we've thought through that stuff, as things unfold, good or bad, we have more insight and granularity into where that's leading us. Because sometimes what happens with the moments of doubt is that as you experience really feeling down about something like my health will never get better, it causes you to feel so bad that at some point you're like, I have to make a decision here on whether I'm willing to stay here or not. So it's not a bad thing that the downs will likely happen, but in thinking through these potentially limiting decisions, it really allows us to weather them in a way that we pull lessons from it, and it actually reinforces and fuels this new direction that we're headed. And then over time, um, I'm not yet at the point where I can say it's easy. Maybe someday I will. I still feel like there's probably a lot of growth that I have in this area, but it's easier overall to really move in that direction as I sit with these and really decide what I think. And then I get to work on them. And that's the kind of thing that we do in our Health Transformation Accelerator. Reprogramming the beliefs. That program is going to be starting later in the fall. So if you are interested in this whole discussion, that entire course is like the step by step of how we do all of this. But in the meantime, check out, internally, when you ask yourself stuff like this, or if you give yourself different options, like it's safe to believe in things that I don't yet see, right? Like test out different ways of saying something and see how you feel when you say them. Because when I said it's insane to believe, there was a resonance with that. Like I believed it. And that's when I went to my trusty NLP friend that I work with, and we did that work. And Nick, you can work on it in a million different ways. NLP is not the only way to do that, but that was just what I did. But asking the questions gets you started, and then in terms of, it's like health. Once you know the problem and the root cause, there's likely multiple different ways you can solve that problem and get at it. It's just going to be what works for you. But figuring out root cause, or in this equivalent, figuring out how you feel and what you actually believe about it, is step number one. The action steps to do it are going to be such that you're probably not going to get it wrong, right? There's going to be multiple ways, so however you get to it is how you get to it. But it also allows us to be like, I'm heading in this way, I'm doing something about it, and we begin to build evidence for ourselves that we will show up for ourselves no matter what. And if there are obstacles along our way, like limiting beliefs or decisions, we will get out of the car, fix them, work on them, and then keep going, because it really builds trust in yourself to say, I will show up for myself no matter what, even if it's uncomfortable, even if I don't want to, even if I'm scared, even if I've failed 10,000 times in the past. You're showing yourself that you'll do it. And that also helps when the going gets tough. It really, really helps. Alrighty, so I would love to hear what you all came up with as you sit with it. So please screenshot this and tag us on Instagram with what your takeaways were. I would love, love, love to hear that. So I'll catch you later. I'll see you over on the Instagrams and talk to you soon.
Thanks for coming out to hang with us on the podcast. It is our goal to transform the way women are treated in healthcare. And we need your help. We need your help to get the word out. We have a lofty goal of 1 million downloads. And we know that as this podcast grows, we're going to be able to reach more women, get more amazing speakers for you, and bring the most cutting edge information.
If you found these podclasses helpful, please take a moment to text 5 women you know the link to the series. We appreciate your help so much. Can't wait to see you next time.